And we are live. Hello, Mr. Carl Potts.
Hello, how you doing?
Well, I'm okay. Well, here in France, we have a curfew at 6 p.m., so it's not that fun.
Oh my goodness, 6 p.m. That
Oh, sorry.
that's you said the curfew is at 6 p.m.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's hard, especially when you finish your work and you want to make some to buy some groceries.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but well, I have a supermarket right across the street, so it's easy. But and I work from home. One of the advantage of this COVID stuff. No, I really thank you for accepting my invitation, and yeah, it's a big honor. I'm a big comic book fan, like everyone knows, and for me, it's kind of surreal have the editor of one of my favorite comic books, well, of many, uh, and yeah, yeah, no, it's an honor. But my audience is really broad, and they are metal guys, fans of electronic music, comic book fans, geeks. So if you can give me the honor to introduce yourself in
Sure.
a few words.
A few words will be tough because I've been around a while and I've done a lot. But
How many
I
words you want?
I moved from California, where I was born and raised, to New York City in my early 20s to try and break into comics. And I started out working at Neil Adams and Dick Giordano's Continuity Studios. And eventually, from there, I got into doing storyboards for a lot of major New York ad agencies, and for a while worked on staff at one of those agencies. And then when I should have been sleeping, I was drawing comics because I always loved it, and that's what I enjoyed doing. They just didn't pay anywhere near as well as the storyboard work did. Um, and then eventually I got just enough stuff out there that when the editor in chief at Marvel in early 1983 was looking for an editor to replace Al Milgrom, who was leaving staff to go freelance. Um, he went out to dinner with Bill Sienkiewicz and told him that he didn't think any of his current crew of assistant editors were quite ready to promote yet. So he was wondering who he should ask to come on staff as an editor. And for some reason, Bill coughed up my name. I'm not sure why. I'll have to ask him. Uh, but
I love his work. He's
yeah,
beautiful.
he and I had known each other for a number of years before then, and I guess he thought I was a fairly sane and stable and reliable person. so, um, so I got this call out of the blue. I'd never thought about being an editor, um, but it sounded very interesting to me. So I joined the staff in early 1983 and was there for 13 years. And
Wow.
most of that time I enjoyed quite a bit. We can go into more detail on that later. But after that, I worked as a creative director for a massively multiplayer online gaming company for a short while. Um, then I was senior creative director at agency.com in New York for a
Oh,
while and bounced around doing a couple of different things. I was creative director for a major nonprofit education company. But all the while, I was, still trying to eke out some comics here and there. And then I started getting more and more into teaching. And these days, a lot of my time is spent teaching at School of Visual Arts in New York and
great.
also teaching online for Academy of Art University, which is based in San Francisco. And I occasionally teach at Manhattanville College and Pace University. I have a seminar in sequential visual storytelling that's somewhat based on the book I wrote for DC Comics, the DC Comics Guide to Creating Comics, and that that seminar I've given at any number of companies and in educational institutions. I recently gave it via Zoom at MIT, of all places, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But
Wow.
I've given it at Google New York and Blizzard Entertainment, Blue Sky, um, Princeton University, lots of different places. Uh,
Wow.
when I was growing up and thinking about getting into comics and first struggling to get into comics, the idea that comics would be taken seriously, much less studied at places like uh, Princeton or Manhattanville or Pace University was unheard of. So
Mm.
it's real interesting and pleasurable change.
Yes. No, for sure. I remember Stanley. Um, Often he said that at the beginning, when he started to work with comics, he was kind of ashamed to tell people that he was doing that was not, but not something cool or well recognized like today. But no, that's it's amazing because finally it's like our new a new mythology. Like the before was like the ancient Greek gods. You know, um, I know. I think it's a really positive. I know. I don't know. Example, especially for, well, it you you can pick good stuff in any age. For the kids, it's a good example to be do the right thing, have values with great power,
Mm,
responsibility, but also for all older people, um, for more mature people, is a medium that you can do so many stuff, so complex, so vast. You can touch anything, and it's between the movies and the books. You know,
yeah.
is perfect. You
Well,
know.
comics are just like any other storytelling media. They
Yeah.
can they can tell stories in any genre or subject matter, and for the longest time, especially when I was growing up, comics were thought of as basically escapist juvenile literature,
Hmm.
mostly centered around superheroes. And
Yes.
um, and they were thought of by a good chunk of the general population in sort of a derogatory fashion.
Mm.
Um, so it's great to see that the U.S., which is basically the birthplace of the comic book, now sees that, especially with all the different types of graphic novels out there, that
Mm.
the medium can tell stories of any genre, subject matter, or style, um,
Yes.
just like film or prose novels or television can as
Mm.
well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Here in France, there's a huge demand for superhero comic books, but here there's a kind of a specific type of comic book. It's called bande dessinée.
Hmm.
It's like basically comic books in French,
Right.
but can be anything. Can be just a family who is moving from the countryside to the city.
Hmm.
It could be a war story. It could be a very complex sci-fi story that you have to read like three times to understand. So no, no, it's a great medium, and I think it's like I say, between movies and books, because when you read a book, you have to imagine everything, and you're just reading and imagine putting the picture in your head is a great exercise. With a movie, you don't have to imagine nothing; they are just showing you stuff. But with a comic book, it's just in between because you don't see the stuff moving. You don't see, you don't hear the voices of the characters. You imagine all that, and I'm sure everyone have the well, now with the movies is more easy, but they everyone have their in their head how the Batman sounds
Right.
or how the Punisher sounds. So that's really
But
interesting.
and with comics too, the audience, without even trying, is constantly trying to fill in the visuals of what's happening in the gutters between the panels, as McLeod calls it, closure, where
Mm,
it's almost like the audience is the in-betweener in animation, where they're given key cells and they're supposed to draw the intermittent steps between those key cells. So in my book on visual storytelling, an example I give is you might have a martial arts fight scene in a comic, and someone who's never seen a Bruce Lee film before, knows nothing about martial arts, never stepped foot in a dojo before, will be filling in the gaps between the panels differently than a Taekwondo master would who's reading it.
mm,
And then a Shorin karate master might be filling in those gaps a little bit different than the Taekwondo master, because there's differences in their styles. So the audience is actually participating. They're bringing their knowledge and experience to that act of closure. It's affecting their visual storytelling in a way that the authors have no control over, because they can't guess what knowledge or experience each member of their audience has. So that's a pretty unique aspect to comics.
yeah, for sure. That remind me a little about Mike Baron, because he was ev- well, I have it on my podcast, and he was taking very seriously all the actions that the character of the Punisher will do have to be realistic. You can bend this way.
Well, he back then, I don't think he does anymore. Back then, when he did his plots, he would usually do thumbnail drawings for each page, which he kept telling the artists they should ignore if they wanted to, but it helped him break down and pace the story and make sure that the action was being portrayed the way he felt it should flow.
Yes.
And I think a lot of artists appreciated that. Some others did not, because even if they're told ignore, ignore the sketches, just look at the notes for the story and what's happening in the story. Once you see something, you can't really just ignore it. It's there, and
Yes.
it's hard for you to just come up with
Yes.
what would come
No,
up with.
Eric Larson told me that yeah, he was so easy to work with him, because at the end he was guiding you. He was guiding Eric to what how he can draw what
Mhm.
is more I don't know, a different kind of collaboration, I think. But
Yeah, I was going to
you
say
mentioned this.
Archie Goodwin was another writer who also had visual storytelling skills, and he would sometimes do sketches for his stories too.
Mm. So this book, the DC Comics Guide to
Uh,
Creating Comics Inside the Art of Visual Storytelling, Carl
yeah,
Potts. Uh, so can you tell us a little about that book?
yeah, it came out, I guess, 2013. It was at least 12 years in the making. I proposed that book when the this whole line of books that were branded the DC Guide to started coming out. The first one was on writing by Denny O'Neil. Then there were volumes on penciling and inking that Klaus Jensen produced.
Oh, great.
And then I proposed this one, and there was a person in charge of overseeing these books at DC, and they
Mm,
were dealing with the book publisher, which was Watson Guptill, a division of Random House, I believe. So
okay.
but he kept putting off doing this book, even though it had been officially approved. And every once in a while, I'd ping him and saying, when are we going to do this? And I just get blown off by it. So my biggest guess was that he didn't really understand comics. He said,
Sure.
hey, we got one on writing, we got one on penciling, we got one on inking. What the heck is visual storytelling? What do we need that for? so, uh, so eventually, when the company got reorganized and Jim Lee ascended to the top, uh,
Yeah.
Jim was one of the people I was fortunate enough to work with early in his career, and he benefited from a lot of the information and exercises that I write about in this book. So he kind of put me in touch with the right people at Warner Brothers and
Mm,
their licensing department to work out the deal to do this book with Watson Guptill. So it
Yeah.
finally got made after waiting around for 12 years to do it. But
No, that's
I
great.
think it was better for the wait because by that point I'd actually gotten into teaching in the schools, and it gave
Mm.
me, you know, more information about what was needed for the students.
No, that's great. That's great how you evolve into education and you can share your knowledge. Because maybe when you start, there were no so much. There were no internet to
Now,
watch some tutorials how to draw, how to write, how to you have
now
to.
knowledge came by very difficultly. It was a matter of finding books on drawing in general, like you could find the Andrew Loomis books,
Mm,
um, the Bern Hogarth books, which were sort of a mixed blessing. And eventually, I found a and the few books on comics themselves usually talked about either the writing or the drawing.
mm,
None of them really talked about the visual storytelling, or if they did, it
sure.
was in passing. And to me, sequential visual storytelling is the art at the heart of comics.
Mm,
And it's also the most difficult part of comics to define and to teach.
mm,
So I thought it was important to finally have a book dedicated almost totally just to that aspect of creating
mm,
comics. And it's something that I had to learn the hard way through um, trial and error. And eventually I found a book on cinematography that contained a lot of the
mm,
information that was applicable, called The Five C's of Cinematography by
mm,
Joseph Maselli. Um, and that helped inform a lot of what I was doing. When I started editing at Marvel, I really tried to intellectualize and put into words a lot of the information I was getting, either just kind of absorbing on an emotional level, um, or an intuitive level, because I wanted to be the kind of editor that when someone brought me writing or artwork that I felt there was a problem with, I wanted to be able to clearly define what the issue was,
mm,
articulate it, and hopefully come up with ways to um, come up with a solution, or at least offer a solution. The creator might find that they've come up with a better solution, but I remember when I was delivering work sometimes, whether it was to ad agencies or to comics editors, and they felt that there was something not quite right with the work, and they had trouble figuring out what it was, and they'd hem and haw, and they'd circle around, and they'd start trying to come up with solutions like maybe if you did this or maybe if you did that, and it was just it was a mess, and I did not want to be one of those people. So
sure.
I when I started editing at Marvel, I really knuckled down and started trying to help define a lot of what was more nebulous in my head so that hopefully I
Mm.
could communicate more clearly with the collaborators and the freelancers.
Yes, for sure. Well, I'm a musician, but I'm also a graphic designer. So I can clearly understand what you mean because sometimes you have clients that they don't know what they are talking about. So they try to explain you.
Uh,
Like, yeah, what you did this is great, but can you make it more pretty? Uh explain explain that. Can you
I
make it
saw
more like winter?
there was
Uh
one of the worst cases of that I saw was at an ad agency. This is way back before there was Photoshop or anything like that. Someone had done a beautiful rendering of a car for an ad, and the client is looking at it, goes, "That's great, but can you turn it slightly more three-quarter angle, like as though you could reach into this thing and it was a 3D model that you could just." And
sure,
and the client
easy.
couldn't understand why that was such a huge thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. But that show how what that's a great editor for me. Someone that can to uh, do the work to have the tool to explain better what he need. The- I don't know.
But
That's
it helped when I started editing. It helped that I had a lot of experience as both a an artist and a writer, so
mm,
um, I could put myself in the shoes of the collaborators and freelancers I
yes.
was working with.
Mm. But can you explain to, I don't know, the regular guy, because everyone knows, if you're a comic book fan, you know the artists that draw the that make the drawing, um, to make the guys who make the writing, the plot. Maybe if you are more into it, you will know the inker. You know the inker who make the, the finishes. But the editor for me is something that the because of course you had a lot of work, but it's not very I don't know
Clearly
how to say
defined.
visible.
It, so you want like a definition of what an editor did, or
What? Yeah, for
okay? Well,
someone
back
that don't know.
back when I was doing it, and I think it's changed a lot now because there's a lot more of the creative decisions are made way up the line now by executives and so on
Mm,
a lot of things that used to be in the hands of the line editor. But generally speaking, as a line editor, for every title that you edit, you're responsible for hiring the creative crew and making sure that they produce the work to your satisfaction on time, since there are almost all periodicals, usually on a monthly schedule. And that if somebody seems to not be able to produce quality work
yes.
or work on time, then you have to find someone to replace them.
Mm,
But what happens is sometimes you'll do a conference either on the phone or in person with the writer to knock around the idea for plots for the next few issues. And then they'll write them up a draft for a plot and send it in to you to read. You'll give them feedback on it. They'll make any revisions that are needed. And then that plot would go to the pencil artist. And the
mm,
pencil artist, this was called the marble method. The pencil artists would generally not get a full script. It would just be a plot. There would be little or no dialogue in it. It would just state what was happening in the story. And it was
really?
up, yeah, and it was up to the pencil artist to break down that plot uh, by pages and figure out how to pace it and what exactly to show and what not to show. Sometimes they even add to the story itself.
Mm,
Um, and then the pencils would then go back to the writer to do the finished script based on the pencils, because the the penciler, if they had a good story sense, was often doing things in the pencils that were really good, but what might not have occurred to the writer to begin with, even if they'd been writing a full script. So a big part of your job as an editor was to try and make sure you were matching up the right talent to work together that had good chemistry and good visual storytelling skills.
mm,
If just one of the partners in that Marvel style was lackadaisical or incapable of pulling their weight, it could be a train wreck. It could be a disaster.
sure.
But when you have the right people working together, Marvel style, I think you get a much better product in the end than you do if it's the artist just handed a full script that is ironclad and tells them exactly everything they've got to do for every panel on every page. And
Yeah.
so then after every step of the job comes in, the plot, the pencils, the script, the lettering, the inks, the colors, the editor has to go over the work and make sure that it all works for him, that there's no problems, and if there are,
Mm,
to get them fixed. And then eventually they prepare it to go out to go to the printers.
mm,
Back when I was editing, there was still physical artwork pages that were being shipped off to the printers. These days, for a long time now, it's all just been digital files.
Wow, that's that's a lot of work.
Plus, that's not even counting, all of the, you know, that you always had people from sales and promo and marketing coming to your office for information and materials because
Yes.
they needed like to have copies of the covers way in advance to go out there
Mm.
for the solicitations and for ads. Uh, so if you had a monthly book, we had these charts that we had on the wall that for each book that showed all the different disciplines from plot to pencils to script and so on, and the dates on them that we had to keep track of. And there was a traffic manager who was Virginia Romita, John Romita's wife. Um,
Mm.
and you didn't mess with Virginia. uh, if you were running late, she'd be on you, and she would make sure that you got that book done, or
Yeah,
you would hear about it.
but I think it's in general with deal with the artists is kind of difficult. I can tell. Well, I never work on the comic book industry, but in the music industry, it happened a lot. So you're working with an
These kind of
artist.
people, I'm an artist. I can't do.
Yeah, it's like tomorrow, 10 p.m. Yeah, no problem. 10 p.m. So where is the stuff? Yeah, right away. Tomorrow. No, no, but you told me 10 p.m. No, yeah, but there's something. Or
Yeah, uh, in the world of periodicals, those people don't last very long. Um, there were some incredibly talented people that I tried to work with that
yeah,
just
that's the problem when
could
you
not
have
produce.
some talented people, but it's hard. They meet the
These
deadline.
days there are other options. Like if someone can't, like I never took on a monthly book for drawing
Yeah.
because I knew I couldn't produce that fast.
Mm.
Uh, so I never agreed to do one of those. So there are people who know they can't do it, but agree to do it anyway because they want the work, and then they
Yes.
mess up your schedule. Um, but these days, like, um, since there's so many one shots and graphic novels and things like that, uh, someone who can't produce a monthly book but are still reliable enough to turn out the work in a somewhat reasonable amount of time, you have other options to be able to use them. Uh,
Yes.
uh, but there are some people that just have some kind of psychological thing going on that no matter what schedule you give them a month, you give them 4 months, you give them a
Yeah.
year, they will miss that deadline because they have
Yeah.
no self-discipline or they have some
Yeah.
self-defeating psychological thing going on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Something related with I feel trapped. I don't feel free. I don't know.
there was one veteran artist whose work I really admired, who came to my office one day and apparently was having a lot of trouble finding work because they'd acquired a reputation for just blowing deadlines left and right. And I felt bad. So I gave them there was a book I edited for a while called Amazing High Adventure. It was an anthology of short stories about adventure stories set in different historical periods. So I gave them, I think it was like a 10-page story. And I said that, uh, you know, I think it was like a month deadline to do a 10-page story. And I said, I will pay you when the whole thing is penciled, not in increments, because I'm not going to be able to use the story if you do 4 pages and then I can't find you anymore.
Yes.
And they said, sure, sure, sure. And they never took the job.
No.
So
Wow. And what happened, for example, when you were hiring something for a job and he didn't show up? there was someone on the top that say, "Hey, Carl, come on."
Well, one of the things that I was able to do, since I was into discovering and mentoring a lot of new talent,
Mm,
um, I had almost sort of a, you got the Yankee hat on, almost a baseball analogy setup going where I had my pros working on my monthly titles.
yes.
I had my AAA people working on fill-in stories, annuals,
Okay, you
one
have your whole
shots,
strategy.
and then my AA people were those people whose work I thought had promise but wasn't quite professional yet. And
Hmm.
so I gave them a 6-page tryout story. It was written by Tom DeFacco called Double Vision, and it was a very compact 6-page story. There was a lot of storytelling to fit into
So
those six
everyone
pages.
have to do the same story.
Yeah.
It was like a kind of a
Jim
tryout.
Lee did it, Mark Badger did it, Whilce Portacio did all these. I had a
No,
stack of
Wills.
all these things, and
What
um,
what is your favorite of all of those?
all of who, but
All of those tryout, because of course you have a lot,
oh,
but
I
one that you saw and you say, "Wow." That,
well, I don't know that I have favorites. I like them all. I have very eclectic tastes and style and approach, so I like them all. But
good, good
anyhow, so
answer.
I would have I'd give them the story and they do layouts and I go over the layouts, give them feedback on it, sometimes do overlays, and they'd fix them. And then after that layouts were squared away, they'd go to the pencils and we go through that whole process of feedback and alteration again. And then if they were going to do inks, we'd do that as well. Uh, at one point, I had this huge stack of original art of these tryout stories. We, even though they weren't meant for to ever be reproduced, they were just training things. We paid them $60 a page
Mm,
to do them because we felt if we asked them to do something, even if it was just a tryout thing, that
yes.
uh, they should not be doing it for free.
Oh, that's cool.
So but I had this whole stack of them that I wish I'd been able to hold on to at some point during every once in a while Marvel would move offices around who was sitting where or whatever. And at some point all those things disappeared. And
No.
and I would love to have like, the trout stories for all those people I mentioned now.
Are you kidding me? That would be amazing.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe someday it'll show up on eBay and we'll find out who it was that
Yeah.
heisted. Uh, but
No, but I'm sure you you kind of mentor and discover a lot of talent. There's one I don't know, a funny story or someone a big name that you help discover, but at the beginning you were saying, "Yeah, I don't know this guy."
There's probably more the other way, and I don't want to name names where I thought someone was going to be hot stuff. They either just couldn't do the work,
So we're
or,
gonna call you after the podcast, like, "What the fuck, man?"
but there was one when I first started editing. There was one person who gave me the the best awful excuse for being late I've ever heard, and this was someone I thought could have been a star. Um, Someone I'd known personally for a few years before I started editing. Um, so this story I gave them just was not coming in. They didn't pick up the phone when I called. They were living out west, so they were 3 hours different. So one night I stayed really late at the office, like 9 or 10 o'clock, and called the number, thinking that they wouldn't expect to be getting a call from the office at that time. There was no. This is back in the day of like rotary phones, so there was no caller
Sure,
ID or anything like
sure.
that. Um, so sure enough, he picks it up, and he was living in the desert. And he said
Okay.
his excuse was, Carl, the air is very dry here, so we have swamp coolers. They're not like traditional air conditioners. They evaporate water blown blown by fans, so that cools things down since the air is so dry. And he said that the only place in the only room in his place for his drawing table was right next to the swamp cooler. So there was a 30-mile-an-hour wind across his drawing table all day long. And so by the time the brush left the ink bottle and hit the page, it was dry. I told him that if he had any complete pages, he wanted to be paid for it, to pack them up and send them out that day, because he and I were through. Um, and this was like someone who was just an extremely talented artist. I just couldn't use them. So one of the things I did too, by finding and mentoring a lot of talent, was that I mentored them not only on the creative aspects, but on the professional side too.
Sure.
When I gave them that 6-page tryout story, I told them, you read this plot over, and you tell me when you'll get the layouts to me. I needed to find out how well they were able to judge their own output. And I told them, whatever date you give me, it can be a long time now. You could take a month or 2 months to lay out this 6-page story if you need to. But whatever date you give me, you have to meet that date. Otherwise, I can't use you.
Yes.
And if on the off chance you have a really legitimate excuse, you have to let me know before the deadline, not after the deadline.
Sure.
And otherwise, if the deadline goes by and I don't hear from you, unless I can visit a hospital and see you in traction because you got hit by a truck, you and I can't do business together.
Yeah.
And
No, but that's the only way to do it, because it's basically based on trust. You can trust an artist that will deliver. Then your bosses will become, hey, Carl, what happened? We need to. It's a like a domino effect. So yeah, no, for sure, you need to, you know delimit the boundaries.
yeah,
Uh,
and it's too bad too, because sometimes these are people who personally I got along with well and liked, but
mm,
they just were unreliable professionally, and
yeah,
that creates obviously tension on the more personal side, and that's a drag.
yeah, for
There was
sure.
one person that I think over the course of like a year and a half had 4 or 5 different grandmothers supposedly die on him. That was his excuse. Uh,
No.
I suppose that's possible if there were a lot of divorces and remarriages in his parents' side, but
Wow.
uh, after that last grandmother supposedly passed away, I stopped.
Yeah. Well, my grandmother just passed away. I didn't use it as an excuse to don't work,
Uh,
but that's classic.
yeah.
That for sure is classic. But for example, you work with a lot of big names like Jim Lee, for sure. Um, for example, Jim Lee was on time.
Oh, yeah. Jim Lee
You
was
were right away, like blow away, like wow,
well.
this guy have talent,
What
or you
happened?
would say,
What happened
yeah,
was that he was going to Princeton. Uh,
okay,
I'm not sure, but I think it was pre-med, and he really wanted to try his hand at drawing comics. And there was a convention in New York City at the Roosevelt Hotel, I think it was, and he came in from Princeton that weekend to show his work, but he was so nervous about showing it, he kept putting it off until the convention was almost shut down, and a lot of
no,
a lot of the people who were there had left, including me. So the only editor I think that was left there was, fortunately for Jim, was Archie Goodwin, who is
hmm,
was about the most admired and likable and respected writer editor that there was in the business, for good reason. And Archie told him, "Well, you should have showed this to Carl when he was here. He likes working with new talent." And so he told Jim to come up to the office on Monday. I guess he cut class, uh, but and brought him over to me. And I looked at his work, and I saw enough there that I thought, the guy had talent. So I assigned him one of those tryout jobs. And right after that, I needed a new artist on Alpha Flight. So
hmm,
he got his career pretty much started. I think he did one or two other short things, but I think he got his career pretty much started working on Alpha Flight. And then about a year after that, I was getting ready to both write and do the layouts on Punisher War Journal. Like, I didn't have time to do the full pencils. And I got the the editorial department and the sales firm to agree to do it on a 6-week schedule instead of a 4-week schedule, so I would be able to both write and do the layouts on it.
But
And
sorry, so the people can understand the layout. It means
layout is loose pencils to break the story down, all the panels, do all the rough drawings,
like a storyboard.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. There's usually not a lot of finished drawing on it. Occasionally I get carried away on a panel. I get into noodling it up and but usually they were, fairly, basic figures and so on. And I wasn't even thinking of having Jim on because I was very happy with him on Alpha Flight. And he wasn't having anybody do layouts for him on Alpha Flight. I didn't think he'd be interested in War Journal. But I tried one or two other people to do finishes over my layouts, and I hadn't been really thrilled with them yet. And I was talking with Jim on the phone. He was living in California at the time. And I mentioned to him that I was having trouble finding someone for that, and he volunteered. And I was very surprised because, like I said, he didn't need to be working over anybody's layouts. So I was very happy. So we started doing that, and then the book was such a hit so quickly that that I was under a lot of pressure to make it monthly. So after I laid out 5 of the first 7 issues, I think it was, I just said, all right, take it monthly. Jim doesn't need me doing layouts for him. I'll just write the damn thing. And that's how it went monthly after that.
And what do you think was the reason of the success of that book?
Well, the whole kind of origin of how the Punisher became a lead character at Marvel is, this is my take on it. Sure. He'd started out as sort of like a guest star or guest villain in a variety of books for a while.
Yeah.
And then there were 2 stories that Archie Goodwin wrote that were in 2 different Marvel black and white magazine-sized comics. And they kind of helped redefine the character in a way, made him much more serious and gritty. And, it's a weird term to use, but realistic, I guess, in a way, compared to some of the other incarnations. And then I believe those are the stories that informed Frank Miller when he guest starred the Punisher and Daredevil. And one of the people who worked in Archie Goodwin's office was Jo Duffy, and she had been writing for Marvel for a long time. She had a nice long run on Power Man, Iron Fist, and she proposed a Punisher graphic novel for me, which turned out to be the first Punisher graphic novel, called Assassin's Guild, that Jorge Zavino did the art on. And around that same time, I was approached by Stephen Grant and Mike Zeck with their proposal for the first Punisher miniseries. And I really didn't have that much interest in turning the character into a lead character at the time, but I liked Grant's proposal. And I always really liked Zeck's work, and I always was looking forward to working on that with him. And so I agreed to do that. And there were other editors at Marvel who thought, this is nuts. He's not a superhero. Has no superpowers. He uses real world weapons. You're nuts. This isn't going to fly.
And on top of that, he killed people.
Yeah. So, but around that same time, if you remember, in popular culture, particularly in the films, there was sort of this trend with the Dirty Harry films and the Charles Bronson Death Wish films and so on. So I thought we might be, tapping into something there if we did this. And I it took me a little while to figure it out, but I figured out a take on the character that um, I tried to have all of my stories and all the stories I edited featuring the character uh, try to adhere to this take on the character, because the Punisher is like a two or maybe a 2.5 dimensional character. He's not really a 3 dimensional character in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And ironically, it's easier to mess up a 2 dimensional character than it is a 3 dimensional character.
Mm.
So the take I had on him was that Frank Castle, after he failed to prevent his wife and children from being killed by mobsters, he felt tremendous guilt, and he
Mm.
had his own death wish. He punished himself by pursuing violent criminals in the hopes of preventing them from causing more damage to others, like he had experienced. But also, if while during his pursuit of these violent criminals, he was ever killed or maimed, he would get what he deserved for failing to protect his family.
Yes.
And so nothing he did was supposed to ever, even when he was successful at a mission, was never, he should never take real satisfaction in it. It was just, you know,
Yeah.
being obsessed and on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. And he couldn't really get close to anybody because his lifestyle meant they usually weren't long for this world.
Yeah.
And um, if you ever found he was taking pleasure in anything or something, he would cut himself off from it because he felt he didn't deserve
Mm.
that. Um, and so that was my take on the character.
For
And
sure.
I tried to make sure, again, any story I edited or wrote kind of played into that. And that he was not somebody to be admired or emulated, or
No, no, for sure.
but occasionally I'd get letters from people who thought he was just a fabulous role model, and I'd have to
Yeah, no, that's a
and I'd have
problem.
to stop and write back and explain
For
all this stuff
sure.
to them and tell them that this is the last thing you want. It's the
Yeah.
last thing the world needs.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I love the character, but no. No,
Yeah,
you can,
there's sort of a cathartic um, satisfaction, I think, to seeing
of course,
these
especially if you,
violent criminals that elude the law one way
yes,
or the other get their comeuppance. There's sort of
especially if you're a victim. If you were a
yeah,
victim, someone hurt you, someone robbed you,
yeah,
yeah, you want to put the skull and go
yeah.
to
But it's
punish people.
it should, to me, it should be a cathartic fantasy, not something to be
Yeah,
emulated.
for sure. I saw it in that way, and for me, the take with War Journal was really interesting because you see a character that is very tough. He kill people, but in the journal, he's very soft. You know, you can see that he's very emotional when he talk about his family. And I remember, especially with Guardiola, when sometimes he can be very, he can manage his anger, and he meet these guys from the Chinese guy from the shop,
Oh,
and
the ninjas, the shadow masters.
yes,
Yeah,
but I and he say he kind of get back to him that yeah, sometimes I forgot why who is the bad guy,
right,
why I'm fighting for.
right.
uh
That
he
was
get
one of
used.
the differences. I wanted there to be a difference between the ongoing Punisher book and War Journal, and to me, the big difference was in Barron, the work that Mike Barron wrote. There wasn't a lot of uh, internal dialogue that the Punisher was doing.
Yes.
The War Journal entries were much more terse and more tactical for the most part,
Mm,
um, and you didn't go into his things. Like even when Microchip's son, Micro Junior, was killed, and the Punisher brings him back, you don't go into his thoughts about how he feels about this. It was just like
yes.
the impact of him there holding Microchip Junior's body and
Yeah.
bringing it back to me was was enough to hit you. Whereas if I was doing a similar scene, I would probably have tried to counterpoint the emotions that he was trying to contain within him with what was
Yes.
happening on the panel.
Yes.
So
No, that's
I like that difference. Or Mike just lets the bold visuals get
yes.
across what he wants to get across. Or I was trying to show some of the psychological underpinnings that were
Yeah,
happening.
no, I love the Word Journal. I missed that on the Netflix show.
Mm.
You know, I was missed that detail because for me it's part of the character. You know, that kind of inner reflection about his thoughts. No, that's
And
well,
there are times when he realizes he's thinking too much and he tries to shut it all down because that'll
yes.
interfere with his mission.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that's why he wrote it down, just to
Mhm.
put it in a in some space. So no, that's really I really thank you for all that kind of inner knowledge of that with yeah, and Jim Lee. The visual of Jim Lee was amazing. I think that was the combination of different take of the character, the visuals that make the thing blow up, and then you have the Punisher War Journal, the Punisher War Zone, the Punisher Armory, the Punisher.
Uh, well, that's something else I talked about recently elsewhere. Was that unfortunately, when the Punisher got popular, everybody wanted to start guest starring him in their books, and
Yes,
since they did not always understand the character or the point of view of the character that I wanted to have
and
out there.
he affect every book. Like every book have to have his kind of the meme part. Like
And
the
well, that's just it. They saw it as a two-dimensional character, and it's easier to mess up a two-dimensional character than a three-dimensional character. So, I would have to often to approve the plots for these guest star appearances, and I would often have to get feedback on them because the writers would sometimes take the easiest way out and just say, "This guy's nuts. He's over the top and he kills criminals. We'll have him go even more berserk and start shooting litterbugs and jaywalkers." And um, to me, that's like the cheapest,
yes.
way out to
No,
deal
is
with.
it that yeah, of
So,
course they
so
don't understand the complexity of the character.
trouble is when I got promoted to executive editor, um, I was no longer allowed to line edit books anymore. I was overseeing groups of editors,
Mm,
and the editor that the books went to, the only one who really had room in his schedule for them was someone who I did not have direct supervision over. Uh,
mm,
and that was because I was writing War Journal at the time. And Marvel had this generally very good policy where if you were a staff editor and you were doing creative work, whether it was writing or drawing, you could not edit the book that you were doing that creative work on. You needed
mm,
to have an objective point of view. So
okay.
uh, when War Journal started, it was given to an editor who I personally thought should never have been an editor. I didn't think that this had the skills to be an editor. Um, so the early plots, I really wanted a real editor. So even though I was uncredited, I would give the early plots to Ralph Macchio, who thankfully would read them and give me feedback on them. So he was actually the real story editor on the early issues of War Journal because the
Really?
editor, the editor who was credited did none of that. Um,
Okay.
and then later on, that editor decided that I guess he needed to start earning his pay, so he started making changes in things that were, I thought, totally unnecessary or counterproductive.
Mm,
So when I got promoted, um, all of the all the Punisher titles went to that editor, and he started allowing things to happen with the character that I thought went totally against the frame of reference I just gave you earlier. And
mm.
I thought that combined with the fact that they were really flooding the market with Punisher product, there's that it's not an accident that that's when the character started to fall in sales.
Yeah, for
Eventually, it took
sure.
a while, but
I one
there
time I
was a lot.
found.
There was a lot of really good work that was really done
Mhm.
after I stopped editing it. But mixed in there was some stuff that I thought was just totally counterproductive.
So when you stop editing the Punisher,
When I got promoted in '87,
was
something.
like the end of War Journal at the
No,
middle of the
no,
running.
I was still writing it because um, it was always being edited by this other editor since I couldn't edit myself. I wasn't.
Mm,
So, but what happened is after I got promoted in '87, is all of the Punisher stuff was being edited by this other person who,
mm,
and all of it, I started thinking was getting out of control. They did things in the armory section. They started doing things where he was. The Punisher never has downtime. He is obsessed with this
yes.
mission, and they would establish things like in his downtime he goes bear hunting or is
What?
a, is a member of the NRA and has a torture chamber
No.
built into his warehouse. And this is when I started getting all that gray hair. So uh, so I just thought that the character was just being messed up. It didn't have a solid vision or someone at the helm that had a solid
Yeah.
vision. And so I just, I couldn't take it anymore. So I quit writing it. I had years of stories stored up that I wanted to do. I had
Hmm.
plot. I don't know if you remember in the very first issue, the last page, I had little vignettes of all these upcoming storylines, and I only got
Hmm.
to about half of them.
Really?
Yeah,
No, but that's great. But yeah, sometimes it's complicated with the. It's not your character. You don't have the control. That's why the reason why Todd
exactly.
McFarlane, Jim Lee, and Eric Larson and Whilce Portacio all they went to create image to have a little more control of their characters, of their what the stories they want to tell. But anyway, your work is still there and is amazing. And yeah, for sure, it affects all the whole industry. I still remember around that time how affect the every title, everyone want to guess the Punisher, or
Well,
they
I
want to
would,
make like I don't know, like more top version, like okay, Iron Man, War Machine,
yeah.
you know. It's
Well,
like
I was a bit guilty of that myself. I even, of all books, we even guest starred him in Power Pack at one point.
I I remember I had a crossover with Archie,
Hmm.
Punisher with Archie.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Well, like what?
yeah. I can honestly
But
claim
the
I had nothing to do with that one.
okay, good. But or Punisher versus Batman. The crossover with Batman was
I didn't
right.
read that. Who wrote that?
Really? Well,
No.
there are two. There are one with is the Batman that came up after Bruce Wayne got his back broke by Bane. That one I don't know. I think it's Chuck Dixon.
Hmm. Well,
And there's another
I would
that
imagine
was
it would be good because he was good at both Batman and Punisher.
yeah, and there was one that I love that was drawn by John Romita Jr.
Uh,
and was one of the was several writers, but one of the writers was Chuck Dixon. And
when I stopped uh, working on the character because I got so frustrated trying to deal with that editorial office, I just pretty much washed my hands of the character. I wanted
yeah, no, no, but I understand. I understand it's horrible when you kind of fell in love with the character and then it start to become something else. But so after you leave that book, you start to work in what other books?
Well, I was overseeing Marvel at the time. There was an editor in chief who was Tom DeFalco, who was him and the publisher Mike Hobson were the best bosses I've ever had. I really enjoyed working with them.
That's great.
And there were three executive editors. Mark Grunwald was the first one. And then I was promoted executive editor. And then a little while after that, Bob Budiansky became the third. And the way it eventually broke down is each of the three executive editors oversaw about a third of the publications that Marvel was putting out. And my third included the Epic line, which Archie Goodwin had originated. And when Archie left Marvel to go back to DC, um, there was a good chance that the Epic line was not going to carry on or be much reduced. And
So sorry to interrupt you, but the Epic line, I remember that was kind of an alternative line to Marvel. Was part of Marvel, but was a
yeah, it was owned by Marvel, it was distributed by Marvel, and so on. But it featured, for the most part, not all the time, but mostly it was for creator-owned titles. It was started as an offshoot of Epic Illustrated magazine,
hmm.
which Archie Goodwin helmed, and then that's about the time when some of Marvel's, creative personnel were really interested in creating new concepts, but they wanted to retain ownership. So instead
Okay.
of having those people go off to some smaller publisher, Marvel came up with the Epic imprint, that's where the first Epic comic was Dreadstar by Jim Starlin.
That was before or after Image?
Oh, way before.
Okay.
Yeah, this was like 1984,
So
83, 84. So
so Jim Starlin owned that character. There's
yeah,
no.
and then the second one was a Steve Englehart book called Coyote. The third was Alien Legion, which I created with Alan Zalnitz and Frank
Yes.
Sirocco. And
Alien
then,
Legion.
and then there was a whole bunch of others that came after that, and including graphic novels as well as ongoing series. Eventually, Epic also did sort of like more high format and or adult versions of some Marvel characters, like I think one or two of the Daredevil, Elektra kind of high end format books came out under the Epic imprint. There was the Havoc and Wolverine um, Meltdown series that was
That
done
was
through the
Bill
Epic.
Sikowitz? No?
No, that was a combination of John J. Muth and Kent Williams
All right.
doing Havoc and Wolverine with, I believe, Walton Louis Simonson did the script, I believe.
Okay.
And then there was, eventually we did like all of the reprints of all the Mobius work. We did the original English translations of
Yes.
all of the
Mobius.
Akira work.
Wow.
So the first really big manga hit in the U.S. was published at Marvel's Epic branch, and that was thanks to Archie Goodwin and
Yeah.
Joe Duffy.
So what do you think about Moebius the first time you saw it there?
I just ordered and got not too long ago. There was apparently a show in Germany somewhere at a museum where they did a book about all the originals that were in the show and background info on them. And I paid more to have it shipped here during this pandemic than I paid for the book.
Really?
And I bought an extra one in case somebody I knew wanted it, and right away Walt Simonson claimed it. So
Yeah.
I have to
But
get.
that's great. That's the European influence
Oh,
that.
I got to when when I took over Epic, I got to know him a little bit. I dealt mostly with his agents, but there were a few times when he came up to the office. And then there was one San Diego convention when I went to lunch with Mobius and
No, really?
our publisher Mike Hobson. And I was just like sitting there in this restaurant in San Diego with Mobius sitting across from me. And I'm drinking an iced tea, sitting there going, how did this happen? How did they,
That's great. Um, can I just can you we well, of course, we already did 1 hour, so I'm sure if you want to go to do the rest of your stuff, I can understand. If not, if you can wait me just 30 seconds, I'll be
Sure,
right back.
sure.
Okay, so I'll be right back.
All right.
Never happened before. I'm really sorry.
No problem.
But how was that lunch with movies?
I wish I had clearer memories. I just remember sitting there kind of thinking, you know, this kid that, naive kid from California who moved to New York and somehow managed to make it into the comic book business.
Yeah.
And now I'm sitting here having lunch with Mobius. It
No,
was
that's great.
surreal.
Yeah. No, I completely understand because sometimes I think you're well, I'm not saying I'm exactly like you, but it's a way of thinking. It's like moving forward. You know, you move forward, you go to the next thing, and then to the next thing, and sometimes it takes time to just just don't move and just watch and say, "Wow, uh, it
Yeah, there
is
are times
cool." What?
when things are happening so fast that you don't really have time to stop and
Yes.
take stock of it or appreciate it, and you don't appreciate it till later. And I'm too guilty of that, of appreciating things more after the fact than while it's actually happening. And
Wow, of
it's
course.
something I wish I could fix more often.
Yeah, for sure. But now you have a very cool story, to tell. That is a produce of
But
years of hard work. But do you think that the European and Japanese art, manga, or like I was saying, like bande dessinée, uh, the French influence or the European influence affect the comic book industry in United States?
um, yeah, I think to some degree it depends. A lot of the artists, like I remember from in the 1970s and after, occasionally when I'd go to one of the bigger New York comic shops, I'd see the hardcover large format French publications.
Mm,
And I that's where I first saw Palacios's McCoy work, and I just like, oh my god, this guy is fabulous. And
mm,
Sergio Topi, um, Battaglia, but all this work that you know most comic book fans in America had never known
yeah.
existed. And um, so, yeah, and almost all of the people I knew in the comic book industry at the time, we would always, whenever we discovered somebody new, we'd always tell each other about it and get all excited and so on. So
No.
Yeah, we were, we weren't getting all of the stuff over here, but we were getting it in dribs and drabs, and we really enjoyed it.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's great when there's that multicultural, you
Yeah.
know, kind of cross pollination. So you're working for Epic. Uh, you create Alien Legion.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little about Alien Legion? How is
Yeah, and that was something that the origin goes way back to when I was a fan trying to draw samples to send in to the publishers to try and get work.
mm,
And I didn't want to redraw stories that had been published already because that didn't seem fair to have the jumping off point of what was done already. So I tried to come up with my own original scenarios. And at one point, I was working on two different science fiction stories. One was about an all human foreign legion in space, and the other was about two aliens that were in conflict, one of which had a serpentine lower body. And I accidentally knocked the pages for both stories off my bed and onto the floor, and they got all mixed up. And as I start sorting them out, the light bulb went off over my head, and I thought, well, why on earth is this foreign legion in space all humans? It should be all these different alien species working
mm,
together, and they should
yeah,
be led by this guy with the serpentine lower body. But I never really had time to do anything with that. I was too busy on other things, and
sure.
when I started editing at Marvel, I really didn't have time to do a lot of the hands-on creative work. I came up with the concept. I came up with some of the major characters and some design sketches, and wrote some ideas about how the universe would work, and so on.
Mm,
So it's like a mini Bible. And then I teamed up with Alan Zalnitz and Frank Sirocco, who ended up doing the bulk of the hands-on creative work for the first series, and they added more characters and more information and so on. So they ended up being co-creators on that with me. And
mm,
anyhow, so I ended up being almost a producer, or almost another editor on Alien Legion. I would hire the creative crews, oversee all the work, uh, either come up with some of the storylines or edit the storylines that Alan or other writers come up. Later on, Chuck Dixon had a very long run on
mm.
the book, and Larry Stroman too. Larry Stroman got his start doing Alien Legion for me. He's another one of the people I was fortunate enough to discover earlier in their career. Actually, Larry got his start because he had met Howard Chaykin somewhere in New York. I think Larry was doing sketches of people for a living in public, and ran into Chaykin. And Chaykin called me up and goes, will you take a look at this guy's stuff? So Larry came up, I looked at it, I put him on some Alien Legion backups, and eventually when the artist, I think it was Chris Warner, who was doing the lead Alien Legion stories at that time, left to do some other work. We moved Larry into the front slot, and that's how he got his start. But it's Alien Legion. Eventually, I wrote a screenplay for it that got optioned several times, and eventually it was optioned and then bought by Jerry Bruckheimer and Walt Disney. And
No, really?
and this is a long time ago, and
Wow.
they they had at least 7 rewrites of the screenplay done. 3 of them were done by. Do you know who David Benioff is? He's the
No.
co-creator of Game of Thrones, and he directed
What?
a lot. And
Okay.
he's a very good novelist on his own. City of Thieves is a World War II novel he wrote that I really like. Um, but when I finally met him, Benioff told me that this made me feel old, but made me feel happy too. He says, I grew up in Brooklyn reading Alien Legion. Uh, so,
Wow.
um, but the people at Bruckheimer's would not let me read any of the rewrites. They said, we'll let you read something when we're happy with it. And they were never
Okay.
happy with anything. So
Fuck.
after seven rewrites, um, the contract had stated that if they don't go into active production by, I think it was 10 years or something like that after they exercise the option, then
No.
the rights would revert back to me. Um, so that was good. It, Tim Miller had contacted me and was a huge Alien Legion fan as well and wanted to direct it. And this was even before uh, Deadpool had come out.
Hmm.
And so I didn't realize that in Disney's kind of notorious for having very involved and onerous contracts. And there was some language that was in fine print in there that said that if that happens, if they don't go in front of the cameras by X amount of time and it reverts back to me, I can make a deal anywhere else I want. But that deal has to include them being Disney being reimbursed for all of the development costs they've incurred.
Wow.
And
How much money is that?
$6 million.
What the fuck?
I don't happen to have that in my back pocket.
Let me write you a check,
Please
Carl.
do.
Don't worry.
And unless I win the lottery or something, it'll be. I've come close to having deals made up, set up at several other different
Yeah, for
studios
sure.
and so on. But Disney is adamant about you know
Okay.
having
Let's
those
start a
process
campaign
stuff.
here. Hashtag free religion. Free.
I don't even know what the most successful Kickstarter drive ever generated.
Yeah.
How much money?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think so. But we're still trying. We came close again recently by trying to find a workaround. But
No, but you make this stuff public and they will gonna say, no, but Carl, don't worry. It's yours. If you make enough noise.
Disney doesn't care about me now.
No, but it's not you. It's the image. If it's the image with with the public. If you make enough noise, like in a way that it will hurt him,
That might work.
it will hurt
That
them.
might work for some companies, but I kind of doubt if that would include Disney.
Yeah, no,
Would
of
be
course,
thrilled. I'd
Disney
be
is
thrilled
huge,
if it
but
was, but I don't. I'm not holding my breath. Um,
yeah, but for example, there's a lot of campaign. It's just share a hashtag and people share it, and the social manager receive it, and they start to freak out, and they say, "Okay, okay, okay."
free
But
aliens.
but yeah, we'll talk like about that later. But no, it's great. But your inspiration for Alien Legion was like, I don't know, like a mix of Star Trek or something like that, or
Well,
was
yes, this was well before Star Wars had come out, and
no, I would
I,
say Star
yeah,
Trek.
but Star Trek. I mean, I remember seeing that as a kid, but uh,
It
I
never
can't
get
say
to you.
I can't say I was a huge fan. Um, it always seemed kind of hokey to me, but
What?
kind of like kind of over the top. Uh, it was I'm not sure how to put this. It was a lot of it had to do with Shatner's acting.
Yeah,
Uh, so
we
it was kind of like
Abner
over the top.
shot. Yes,
Um,
yeah, for sure. But
so
the stories were cool, I
there
think.
was some neat stuff in there, yeah. But um, so I came up with Alien Legion. I'm sure the fact that I saw Star Trek probably had some influence, but I was probably more influenced by science fiction comics I'd read as a kid, or
Sure.
some of the science fiction books I read. I remember at one point I went through a Heinlein phase where I read just about every Heinlein there was around. Some Asimov, Fritz Lieber.
Mm,
Obviously, I was into Kurt
sure.
Vonnegut as well. Um, so um, I just, I can't say there's any particular thing that was the main inspiration. It
You
just,
ever were a
uh,
fan of just Judge Dredd,
I didn't see Judge Dredd until after I
the
was
movie?
a professional. No, a working professional. That I got
Okay,
to know what Judge Dredd was. Um, as you can tell, I live near a fire station, and they just got a call. That's why you
it's
hear that siren.
okay. If
Uh,
your house is not on fire, it's okay.
it's not me, at least that I'm aware of sitting here. But if so, the siren would have gotten louder, not distant. But
No problem.
it's uh, oh, there's another one taken off.
Yes.
But they I sometimes where story ideas or concepts come from. Sometimes they just seem to pop into your brain. It's
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's no. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. uh, Just that because they're kind of different kind of races mixed, but of course the inspiration can come from anything,
one of the
from nothing.
one of the other creator-owned titles I did at Epic when Epic Illustrated was going. It was serialized there and then collected in a graphic novel. Was a series called Last of the Dragons that I did the plot for and did the pencils for, and Denny O'Neil did the script over my plot, and
Mm.
Terry Austin inked it. And that was reprinted a few years ago by Dover Publications. It was originally
What's the name? Last.
Last of the Dragons, and it deals with Japanese dragons at the end of the samurai era in the 1870s when Japan has been opened up, and it's being rapidly westernized. So uh, I've been working on. I wrote a pilot for that and a pitch document for that, and I'm trying to see now if I can get that set up as a cable series. So we'll see what happens there.
Oh, that will be great. Yeah, I think I. Yeah, but we can see the
Had you ever seen
image.
that
Correct.
before?
No, but I think I found it. Like,
There you go.
yeah,
That's
Potts O'Neill. Austin Severin. No, that's
yeah.
awesome.
Marie Severin did the coloring on the insides.
Yeah, now that look great. So what is the story?
It takes place in the 1870s when Japan has been opened up to Western trade and influence, and it's trying to rapidly
Ah,
westernize
okay.
and industrialize. And there's very little pristine mountain uh, range left for the relatively few remaining Japanese dragons. So
Sure.
there's a priesthood that oversees the dragons, and the dragons are naturally peaceful characters, and the priesthood reflects that. But when it looks like the industrialization, the clear cutting of the forests, and the strip
Mm.
mining and so on that's going on is going to endanger their last enclave, last preserve.
Have a little ecological message.
Yeah, some of the priests decide that they have to train the dragons to be attack dragons, and they have to fight to survive, which totally goes against centuries or eons of instinct that the dragons have and that the priesthood was supposed to uphold. Uh, so there's a half English, half Japanese outcast who's adopted by a ninja clan and trained, and he's involved with being hired to try and prevent the priests from. When the priests realize that there's no way they can hold out in Japan, one of the priests had traveled to America and seen just how seemingly limitless the American Northwest's forested mountains were, larger than all Japan, from Northern California to Oregon and Washington up into Canada. It's just nothing but pristine forested mountains. And they couldn't conceive of that ever being fully encroached on. Little did they know.
Wow.
So they decide they're going to transport uh, a lot of the dragons and the eggs in steamships to the American Northwest and
Wow.
set up a preserve there. And the Native Americans are not amused when they arrive. So there's conflict there as well. So it's a big involved story about
Wow.
all these different times and eras coming when modernization and industrialization is taking over from the old ways, and the end of the samurai era. All these
Hmm.
things kind of come together.
Yeah, that's amazing. And well, we already are doing almost 1 hour and a half, so maybe
Holy
we
cow!
will.
We didn't even get to one of the subjects we said we were going to talk about, which was
Yeah, for
culture.
sure. I what?
I can cover that real quickly if you want.
Sorry?
I
What?
can cut that about the work culture at Marvel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So no, no, no. I'm not in a hurry at all. I'm just thinking of you, but for sure we can do that,
Uh,
and it will be for sure. Uh, I don't know. You want to do it now, or you
sure.
want I invite you another time? It's
Uh,
like
well, I can take about 15 minutes and talk about it here.
okay.
But
So to let people know, we're gonna talk now about the work culture of Marvel.
right.
Yeah, take a sip.
Um, Dr. Pepper.
Eh,
The the One of the things I wanted to talk about, I thought might be of interest, is that I was there on staff for 13 years, and during about 10 of those years, Marvel had what I found to be the best corporate culture that I've ever encountered. Um, the other 3 years were split between the last year and a half or so of Jim Shooter's reign there, where he started doing
that was
things.
around what year?
Um, let's see. I think he was replaced in '87, uh,
Okay.
so about a year and a half before that. And then after the company got bought by Ron Perlman's people, McAndrews and
Mm,
Forbes, I think it is, or uh, then the corporate culture changed dramatically
sure.
and as well. And I think a lot of us were spoiled during the times when they were good, because the company had a president named Jim Galton, who was a good man, and right under him was the publisher Mike Hobson, who was also an excellent man. And then for most of my time there, the editor in chief was Tom DeFalco, also a very good man. And the corporate culture was such that creativity was encouraged, fun was encouraged, professionalism was encouraged, so that you could have fun, but you could have fun as long as you got your work done.
A little
Uh,
like Google now.
I guess I've only visited the Google offices a few times. I've never been up there for long enough to tell what it's really like.
But
Um,
it's part of their culture. It's
yeah,
like they realize it's not that they are nice. It's that they realize that when you want to have creative people to the creative things, you need um you know kind of
the right
certain
atmosphere.
freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at Marvel, what would happen is that almost all of us that were working there in the editorial department and the creators themselves, the freelancers, we were doing the job we always wanted to do. We grew up reading and loving comics for the most part. Most of us. Some people got into comics later than that, but uh, and so we were doing what we dreamed about doing since we were young. And uh, most of the people involved in comics, either on staff or freelancers, not everybody, but most of them, I think a much higher percentage than in many industries, were actually nice people.
Yeah.
Um,
They were living the dream.
and I made a lot of really good friends there. Everybody was generally helpful and positive for the most part. Um, And we used to enjoy helping each other and being creative. There was a camaraderie there. And a lot of us liked each other so much that even out of work, we would hang out together. Sometimes, like during the summers back then, the publishing industry gave uh, half days on Fridays to the staffers. In theory, you were working an extra, I don't know, half hour or an hour, whatever, 40 minutes, whatever it was for on the Monday through Thursday. But after 1 o'clock, you got out early. So a lot of times, a bunches of us would go to the movies together or go. Ralph Macchio had a swimming pool at his place in New Jersey. We go hang out there,
Awesome.
have dinner, things like that. And when we go to conventions, we'd often do things together outside of the convention. San Diego, a bunch of us would always go jet skiing in Mission Bay or go to the drive-in movie theaters in convertibles. And, just things like that. It was a lot of fun. And Mark Grunwald was sort of the heart and soul of Marvel's, creative spirit back then. And he helped instigate a lot of the fun events. Even at conventions, he created programming with the fans that would get them involved with the creators and the editors. Like would do, game show type panels where the fans could win prizes from Marvel. He would talk people into doing, like a lot of us in the business are introverts by nature. And Mark actually was an introvert too, but you'd never know it in some cases because he forced himself to be an extrovert at times. And he would get us to do things just out of his enthusiasm that normally we wouldn't do, like contests with the fans to bust balloons by sitting on them with your butt to see who could bust the most. He would get the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics to get into a balloon busting contest just because he was so enthusiastic about it.
No, that's
and,
awesome.
and
Because that create a sense of connection, a sense of community, that you are feeling part of something that is not, is not just the big boss and the little employees. There is no the creators and the consumers. There is all a big part of a big family.
There's a couple of stories I can tell you that kind of illustrate this. One was Jim Galton was the president of the company, and he was on the 11th floor, and Tom DeFalco was editor-in-chief, and he was on the 10th floor. Now, normally when the president wants to see the editor-in-chief, he calls him up to his office, right?
Yeah.
Jim Galton decided to walk down the stairs and go and stick his head into Tom's office, and Tom didn't see him. Tom had his back to him, but Tom was leaning back in his chair, pondering something. He was obviously deep in thought. So the president of the company turns around and goes back upstairs, and Tom's secretary sees this. And later on, the secretary tells Tom, Jim Galton was here looking for you. He goes, oh, why didn't you tell me? So Galton comes down again a bit later and sees Tom is working on some bureaucratic paperwork or something.
Sure.
And Galton goes in and talks to Tom about whatever it was he came down to talk to him before. And Tom asked the president, well, why didn't you, just ask me this earlier when I heard you were down there? And Galton said, I saw you were deep in thought about something, and I pay you to strategize the creative and editorial. And so I didn't want to interrupt you while you were doing what I'm paying you to do. I thought that was a very enlightened point of view. And there was a time right after, the latter part of Shooter's reign was very troubled at Marvel. It was very tense. A lot of people got fired or quit because they had difficulties with him. But when he was dismissed and DeFalco took over, I wanted to bring back some of the feel that Marvel had around the offices, where people would goof off sometimes and play jokes and so on. Not the kind of practical joke where someone was made the butt of the joke, but they were in on the fun of it. And so I brought in my travel fishing rod. I'm an avid fisherman, and I had a fishing rod broke down like into 4 sections with a reel that had very thin, almost invisible monofilament line on it. And we were on the 10th floor of the editorial office. And in New York, it was very rare. We had windows that actually opened. So I took my rod and reel into Ralph Macchio's office, and we closed the door. We opened the window, and we tied on. He had like this little action figure of Darkseid from DC.
No.
That had this little prism, and they had that channeled light that came in the top out its eyes. So he had red glowing eyes. So
Yes.
we tied that onto the line, and we had that bouncing along the street next to the pedestrians. And they look at it and go and grab for it, and we'd yank it up over the awning that was on the building on the first floor, and it looked like he just flew away and disappeared. And
that's awesome.
So we were doing that, and some of the people that worked at Marvel were walking by and seeing this. And one of the people that walked by was the office manager, took care of making sure everything was where it was supposed to be, and supplies were and all that. And the last name was Aaron Reich. And
just so
well, it was and the nickname we had, because this person was so strict in a lot of ways, was Aaron Third
I'm
Reich.
sure.
Aaron Third Reich was the nickname. And so
all right.
So this person thought what Ralph and I were doing was just absolutely deplorable, and went up and complained to the publisher, Mike Hobson, who at that time I didn't know very well. And Hobson comes downstairs, opens the door, and at that point, I'm the one that has to pull out the window. Ralph's actually sitting behind the desk, taking a phone call. And Hobson goes, "Boys, what are you doing?" So I very sheepishly reeled everything in, broke it down, all that. And Tom went down to talk to our direct boss, Tom DeFalco. So I'm waiting for the rest of the day to be called down and taken to task by Tom. And 5 goes by, 5:30 goes by, it's going on 6. I still haven't heard from Tom, so I decided to go down there. And I stuck my head in the door and I said, "Tom, was there something you wanted to talk to me about?" He goes, "No, why?" And I go, "Didn't Hobson come down here before?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, he came in, closed the door, and said, 'You know what those boys are doing, Potts and Macchio?'" And then he started howling with laughter as he recalled what we were doing. So that was the kind of leadership we had that. And that, to me, like a good work culture, it has to be top down. If the people at the top don't exhibit it like Galton did when he had that point of view of watching DeFalco work by thinking, or Hobson did when he went back to Tom to supposedly, discipline us, and he thought it was actually hilarious what we were doing. Without that, it can't survive. So, like when the Perlman people took over, they brought in a whole lot of personnel that were just really, we called them bean counters. A lot of accountants that were really, had no feel at all for the product we were producing, or the love that went into it and the effort. And they were very strict and corporate in a lot of ways. And a lot of stuff that used to go on before, the kind of feel and the camaraderie just died. They came up with a system called Marvolution, where they divided the company into 5 different publishing groups. Each one had their own editor-in-chief. I was one of them. But we ended up having to be in competition with each other for talent and for marketing budgets and things like that. Whereas before, it was all one big family that was pulling together in a lot of ways. So to them, like, creating this competition and this, infighting was like a plus, which it wasn't. Anyhow, so that killed a lot of the feel.
Kill motivation.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a total coincidence that Marvel's most successful and profitable publishing period as a publisher was during the time when DeFalco and Hobson were in charge.
Yes.
And that it declined rapidly when the Perlman people got in charge, and
Yeah.
they got rid of both Hobson and DeFalco.
Yeah. No, but now there's a lot of scientific studies that prove that when you do your job is to be creative, you can have, for example, if your job is to automatic stuff, like for example, put a thing, a screw in something.
Assembly lines.
Yeah, an assembly line that the pressure work because you will do it faster. But if you do something creative, you can have that kind of structure, and that's what the Google people realize. They give their employees more freedom, and there's an excellent book that I recommend everyone from Daniel Pink called Drive, and he made a lot of scientific studies to kind of show that when you, for example, when you stock the experience, when you give more space to creativity, you give more space to do that kind of thing, you're you still have deadlines, you still have to do your job, but you don't have this rigid structure that will gonna push against each other, you know that it give you one direction and everyone will gonna work for that goal that was like you were describing.
Mhm.
It worked better, you know it worked way better.
And
So
and
no, that
generally speaking, I think, I mean, some people can get very creative when they're put under intense pressure, but and generally speaking, for especially on the creative arts side, I think if you get the right people in the right situation, and you give them room to think about stuff, a lot of creativity is how you juxtapose different ideas together in ways that haven't
yes,
been done before. And that's hard to do when you're under intense pressure. It's
yes,
easier to
for
do.
sure.
But one of the best ways to do it, uh, some of my fondest memories is sitting around with other Marvel creators or editors and brainstorming story ideas where ideas are just bouncing off each other, off the walls, and ricocheting and changing and morphing and all that.
Yeah,
If you have the right people in there with the right attitude, brainstorming it can be a blast, and you can come up with a lot of great material.
yeah. Do you have a cool memory about that?
Well, there was an issue of Doctor Strange where we needed a fill-in, and I think I had Ralph Macchio do the writing on it and Brett Blevins do the art, and all three of us were in my office brainstorming that story, and I remember that being a very fun session. There was also another Ralph Macchio project where he was writing the Solomon Kane limited series for me, and we were doing a combination of adaptations of Robert E. Howard and some original stories. And we did we brainstormed a story where Solomon Kane met his Muslim counterpart
Hmm.
and what happened there. And I thought that turned out well. So Mike Mignola drew that story,
Oh, Mignola.
and it was I really enjoy those things, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
But
no, it's amazing.
anyhow, so my bottom line is that for really good corporate culture, you need to have the right people at the top, not just encouraging it, but modeling it like Jim Galton did
Yes.
and Mike Hobson did. Uh, Otherwise, if the top is not that way, if they're very uh, stringent and restrictive and take themselves too seriously, uh,
Yes.
it's hard for the people below them to maintain a positive creative culture.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. No, that's great. I really thank you for sharing that, and of course, I think is Well, it's taking some time, but companies they start to realize little by little that there are more science that back that kind of proposal. So no, for sure, I think. Well, I really thank you for your time, and I don't know.
It's my
uh,
pleasure. We covered a lot of territory.
Yes. I don't know. Maybe to finish, I will just gonna show real quick. Well, that was the book I was talking about. It's really interesting. Try the surprising truth about what motivated us. Is a really great book about from Daniel H. Pink about
Okay.
creativity and stuff. But uh, I think you have something in the works that's not the final title, of course,
Yeah. Well,
but
the title is The Flying Column, but
yes,
it, it'll eventually be published by the Naval Institute Press. This is a story set in World War II that's based in part on my mother's family's experiences in the Philippines during the war, where they were imprisoned by the Japanese and uh, for over 3 years. And General MacArthur put together a force that they dubbed the Flying Column, which was the 1st Cavalry Division and 44th Tank Battalion, told them to drive 100 miles through Japanese lines to
wow,
not stop unless they really had to, and break into Manila and to secure that prison camp so that the prisoners couldn't be killed. The Japanese were in the process of blowing up and torching the city and killing as many civilians as they could. And MacArthur wanted to secure all of the American uh, prisoners as quickly as he could to save them. And if they hadn't been successful, I wouldn't exist because my mother was an adolescent or a young teenager at the time.
wow.
So Bill
That's,
Reinhold's doing this beautiful artwork. He's just taking
yeah,
far too long, but it looks gorgeous.
big up to Bill Reinhold. He made actually a cover for one of my albums.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I have it on my podcast too. He's a great guy, and yeah, you can see there his beautiful artwork. He's
yeah.
old school.
He's doing it all in ink wash, and then
Yeah,
we're scanning them, and in Photoshop turning it into sepia tone, so it has that kind of 1940s look.
yeah. No, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's
This
great.
this is one of the Bill's doing almost all the artwork solo. There's a few shots here and there I did layouts for. This is one I did the layout for, and Bill did the finished artwork on it, and it just uh, I'm really happy with that the way that.
Yeah, no, that's really cool.
I
Cool
got
stuff.
to in the course of, if you go back to that previous one, I got in the course of this thing, I got to interview a lot of the people that actually were involved. And the
This
guy you
one?
see, yeah, and the guy you see there that's running out there with his knife to cut the fuse on that makeshift
Yeah.
bomb, it's a real guy I got to interview uh,
Really?
in life. Yeah, he ended up, he was actually a precursor of a Navy SEAL. He was an underwater demolitions expert who was attached to this Army unit to help them deal with these sorts of makeshift bombs the Japanese were creating. And
Wow.
he eventually became a congressman from, I think, Tennessee.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to someday when
Hey,
Reiko finish.
you and me both.
Well, and you also told me about this
Oh
Catwoman,
yeah,
Soul
yeah,
Stealer.
yeah. That's going to be coming out, I think, this summer. Is that what it says? I can't read the date they
It
have.
says 2019.
Well, I can assure you it's not out yet. But yeah, I believe it's this summer. It got pushed back a few times, but it it is this the prose or the this might be the prose book as opposed to the graphic novel it's being based on.
No, no.
And
I
I think
think
that's
it's
what,
just the novel.
yeah.
Yeah,
So there's
you're
a
right.
graphic novel version coming out that was
Okay.
the
Sorry.
writing was adapted by Louise Simonson, and
Okay.
the uh, artwork was being done by a woman whose name escapes me, I'm afraid, but um, they asked me to do the layouts for the artist doing the
So,
finished art.
so what's the story? Can you tell us a real quick?
Um, I don't know if I'm allowed to.
Ah, sorry.
So,
Yeah,
but it so
but it's
they
based on this book.
yeah, but
Okay, so
there's a graphic novel adaptation. But they uh, they asked me to do the layouts for the book so that the finishing artist could have them to work over. So the storytelling would be all worked out in the layouts and the compositions. So, but I
okay,
didn't really have time to do more than a handful of pages. So, uh, one of my more advanced adult education students at School of Visual Arts, Brett Ryans, I showed them his work, and he ended up doing like 99% of the layouts for this graphic
okay.
novel. And that's just his first, work for a major publisher was to do the layouts for this very big graphic novel project. So that'll be coming out this summer, I believe.
Oh, that's great. Well, I really thank you for your time. We almost did 2 hours.
Holy
I
cow!
I expect I'm really sorry. I expect you it was not too boring for you
No,
and
I,
you
I
spent a good
enjoyed.
time.
I enjoyed it. I'll just have to stay up another couple hours to get the work done. That's all. I'm used to that.
All right. So I really thank you, Mr. Carpot. Thank you for all your work. Thank you for taking the time to share all these amazing stories, and maybe see you another time.
Sounds good. Hopefully, I'll get over there sometime for a convention. I haven't been to one yet, but when
Yeah, that would be amazing.
everybody's got their COVID shots, hopefully that'll start up again.
Yeah, no, for sure. So take care. Thank you very much, and just keep the
We'll,
good work.
will do. Take care.